So Camilla, thank you so much for participating in this IPALA Leadership Academy session. And it's very important to us that you are doing so, particularly as a woman leader. So thank you so much for participating. Could I start by asking you perhaps to describe the leadership position or positions that you currently are in?
So thanks, Kevin. It's a real honour actually to take part in this. So I'm Camilla Kingdon, and I'm currently president at the Royal College of Paediatrics and Child Health, which is one of a number of Royal Colleges in the UK, which oversees training and assessment, but importantly also has oversight over the working lives of paediatricians and, really importantly, advocacy for child health, primarily in the UK, but we have members around the world. We have a total membership of 20,000, but at least 20% are actually international. So we have a sense of responsibility for paediatricians who are members all around the world, and we're very proud to have a strong global child health arm to our work, which a lot of our members find incredibly interesting and fulfilling, and so that's a really important part of our work as well.
Yeah, and can I commend you and your college for that too, because I've spent time in the UK at your college and are very impressed with the global mindset that is present there. That's really terrific. Camilla, could I ask you to describe what you think would have been the key steps in your professional journey that led you to come to such a senior leadership position as you are now in? Were there some key steps? Did you set about it in a determined way? Just what was the process for you becoming such a senior leader as you are?
So that I find that in a way quite a sort of uncomfortable question, if I'm honest, because there is absolutely no way I sort of at the age of 30 decided I had my eyes set on becoming president of the college. Up until about, I would say 5 years ago, I didn't even think it was within my reach. I didn't think I had the skill set. I didn't think I was the type of person. So there was no game plan behind this. I think I come from a position of being, so I grew up in South Africa. I came into medicine, and this is going to sound a bit old-fashioned, but by that, a strong sense of, I guess, altruism, wanting to make an impact, and found that actually as I worked my way through my career, I was looking for opportunities to make an impact on people's lives. And I guess when I originally went into medicine, I thought I would be making a significant impact on patients' lives. And I hope I have, but I think increasingly as doctors, we find that actually there's so many societal issues around that impact on health that us as clinicians, our ability to really genuinely make a significant difference to, for instance, such a whole child's life, I started feeling frustrated that I didn't have that direct ability. And so I started looking for other ways of developing that part of my professional work. And so I got into education and training, actually, because I felt through that route I could actually make a difference on the working lives of paediatricians, and so developed into I took up a role as what was called the head of the London School of Paediatrics, which essentially oversees paediatric training for the 1,000 trainees in London. And I think that gave me a lot of self-confidence and a bit of a sense of self-belief that I could challenge people in positions of authority, which I guess I didn't really believe I had the permission to do before. I developed, and I guess in doing that, I developed skills to do that diplomatically and effectively, rather than just being loud and noisy on the edges, as it were. And then through a couple of other leadership roles, I think it was slowly my self-confidence developed, and I started to realize that actually, I can make an impact. I can challenge people that I had held in huge esteem and that I didn't think I, could have a sensible conversation with, actually that I could do, and actually it could actually make an impact, and that my style of leadership, which is quite kind of collaborative, and I'm very, very compelled by the kind of notions of compassion, that actually that can have traction. And so it slowly just dawned on me that actually this role as president was within my reach. But of course, it's an election process in this country, and so it does. You have to put yourself out there and think, well, actually, I will have to accept being unsuccessful. So that was a bit scary. But anyway, I was very fortunate and was elected into the role. So yeah, I don't think there was ever a direct path, and a lot of it came from me discovering my abilities and self-confidence, I think, and of course, wonderful people around me reinforcing that.
Yeah, but Camilla, those are very important points you're making, and I think the issue of having a mindset that's about serving and humility, that actually comes through very clearly from so many of our senior leaders, and I think that's heartwarming. And the issue that you've raised about gaining confidence step by step, very important messages. So thank you for that. That's very, very helpful. What do you think, in your view, are the key attributes of good leaders? What does a good leader need to have? What are their key attributes, do you think?
So that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Because I think, I think we'd all recognize that we've got many leaders who actually we just don't respect, or we believe are not effective, and I see examples of that in medicine, but we see it more broadly as well. So actually, what is the crucial quality? And I guess it's a range of qualities, but they're hard, because I think for me the key attributes are around, as you've said, humility, because humility gives us the opportunity to listen. And I think I've learned more from listening to people and really trying to kind of understand what are the issues than I think from any other way of interacting. Often the solutions to problems are actually just out there if you'll only give people the opportunity to talk about it and be heard. So I think listening and collaboration kind of all goes hand in hand with that. And for me, it must be underpinned by compassion. And the reason I say all of this is that I think the world in which we work, it's super complicated. If you think about, say, some of the big topics we're having to deal with, climate change, for instance, the pandemic, trying to lever up the gains for child health across communities. These are really complicated kind of multi-system problems that require us to be navigating across health, social care, education, politics. These are very complicated problems. You can't sit within a kind of uni-professional silo and fix them. No. And so you have to get out, listen, collaborate, connect with people. And I think that skill sets, those are very difficult skill sets, actually. And that's why I don't think we see the kind of quality of leadership around as much as perhaps we ought to. But I think if you can underpin it with compassion, if you go into it with this sort of sense of wanting to connect as human beings, listen to other people, enable others, I think that's a lot. You'll get a long way to, making some good strides in this space. So I think that the fact that we're so interconnected as human beings now across the planet, on the one hand, is a challenge, but on the other hand, I think gives us huge opportunities if we can just really get into that space and not feel threatened by it as leaders.
No, that's very helpful. I'll ask you a question which you may feel is redundant, because you may feel you've covered a fair bit of it, but in terms of the key principles that guide you, is there anything else? You've talked actually quite a lot about the sense of compassion that you have. Are there other sort of key principles that guide you in your leadership? You've covered a fair bit already, I have to say.
Well, I'll be honest with you, and I'm having grown up in South Africa, that there is a concept that for me is incredibly important, and that's a concept called Ubuntu, which is an African concept. It's actually, the word Ubuntu comes from Southern Africa, from the Zulu and Xhosa people, but in fact, every tribe across Africa has a word that means the same thing, and Ubuntu means I am because we are.
Oh,
And it's this extraordinary notion of the interconnectedness of human beings, and the fact that I only exist because I am part of the greater group,
yeah.
and that we exist together.
Yeah.
And the Anglo-Saxon version of Ubuntu is the word kind, because kind comes from an old English word kind, from which we get the word kin or kinship.
Right.
So it's absolutely fascinating, because actually across the Africa and the Northern Europe, there are these words that are talking about the same thing, which is about the fact that as human beings we're connected. We're connected as kin, and so kindness. And there's now a lot of really interesting writing about this concept of intelligent kindness. So intelligent kindness is a way in which we harness each other's humanity to actually crack some really wicked and difficult problems. And there's some fantastic writing from various psychologists around how you can utilize intelligent kindness, particularly in health and social care, to create what they describe as something called a virtuous circle, which is where if you connect with people, be it your staff or be it patients, actually, if you start listening in a very attentive, very specific kind of way, and they talk about listening with fascination. So that's really, putting away your phone, switching off your emails, and giving this person 100% of your attention. How you can start together to collaborate, to start fixing difficult problems. And so I find those concepts incredibly compelling. And it's so easy to get, to lose your way in the million competing interests that one faces in the kind of world of work that we currently live and work in. But for me, clinging to this kind of my true north, which I try and keep my compass aligned to, is very much about kindness, Ubuntu, this notion of when everything else is going a bit pear-shaped, just think about connecting with human beings, listening with fascination, because I think often that just suddenly the whole thing becomes a bit clearer, and you start discovering answers to really complex problems.
These are pearls of wisdom, Camilla. Yeah, fantastic.
Well, they're not mine. They're not mine. I mean, I just find it fascinating. I have felt I've had a lot of real light bulb moments reading around some of these topics. And my kind of all-time hero is Archbishop Desmond Tutu, who sadly very recently died. But he used the concept of Ubuntu in coping with some of the horrendous issues around racism in Southern Africa. And so, he's a man who doesn't just talk the talk. He's got evidence this works. And so I find this a really compelling way of thinking about some of these leadership issues.
Thank you. So I don't want to label too much of your time, but the people on this leadership course, what advice would you give them about? Some of them are reasonably senior and some are quite junior. So just thinking about a group of paediatricians contemplating or thinking about equipping themselves for better leadership ability, what advice would you give them, Camilla?
So I think, we think of leadership in these kind of hallowed terms, as if it's something sort of special and different and only set aside for an elite group. But I think, when I look back at my younger self, I didn't particularly see myself as a future leader. But I think I think we need to dispel the myth that there's something special about it and only an elite few can do it, because I think that's nonsense. And if I look at some of the people around that I think are really extraordinary leaders in the world of work that I have, I think a lot of them we would have looked at in their earlier years and never for a moment thought they could have been a leader. So I think we just need to get away from this idea that leadership is for special people and so on, and really say that it's about getting out and just seeking opportunities and start small. My journey, as I said, was mainly through education. So it was literally just working my way up the education ladder. And there wasn't a defined ladder. You know, there wasn't somebody who said, if you want to be head of school, do these 6 steps. So it's about, I guess, trusting your inner instincts and just getting stuck in, look for opportunities. It's slightly unfashionable because I think, we've been quite rightly talked to our younger generations about the importance of work-life balance and about being sort of boundaried, about not letting work leach into your home life. And I absolutely, I do think that's an incredibly important message. But I would say that I think one often does have to kind of get a bit stuck in and go the extra mile. I think if you really want to make inroads into developing your kind of future potential and potential leadership opportunities, I do think it's about looking for opportunities to learn and develop more. I did a master's course, which actually, strangely, first of all, the topic was fabulously interesting. It was about managing medical careers, so it was something that I found very interesting. But the reason I particularly valued it is that it gave me quite a lot of academic self-confidence. I felt I could start speaking with a bit of authority on this topic. So I think it's about looking for opportunities to develop your self-confidence, because then you start feeling much more enabled to addressing difficult issues, speaking to senior people that you might have held in positions of, huge respect and maybe a bit out of reach. You start thinking, well, actually, no, I could have a conversation with that person. I've got some really great ideas that I want to share with him or her. And so I think it is just that slow, incremental process of going the extra mile, seeking out opportunities, surrounding yourself with people who are going to mentor you and support you, give you, positive but also developmental feedback. You don't want to be surrounded by a group of people who just keep telling you you're wonderful. I think you do need, I have really valued people who've taken me aside and said, do you know what, you may just want to think about doing this slightly differently. How about trying such and such? I think those are little nuggets that you just are priceless. And so finding people in your sort of world that are going to give you that check and challenge, I think is really useful.
Yes. On this course, all the participants have to have a mentor. And
brilliant.
So we are actually working with their mentors as well as with the participants to really reinforce that message. And I think that comment, Camilla, of needing to have work-life balance, but also recognising that if you're in a senior role, you do actually have to extend yourself and you have to have a major commitment to the task. These sort of roles, and you can't do them just part-time, I'm afraid. I mean, I value the fact that people can work literally part-time and respect that. But I think the commitment you need to go that extra mile is actually a real pressure.
Yes, I agree. And, and that's why this is not for everybody.
No.
Which is absolutely fine. Absolutely fine. But I think for people who actually do see themselves in senior roles in the future, I don't think we can sugarcoat it. It is about, I'm afraid, hard work.
Yeah.
And some of that hard work is burning the midnight oil.
Yeah.
But I would say that, that for me, the rewards have just been extraordinary. I have absolutely no regrets. My kids sometimes when I'm sort of having a bit of a wobble, it's often my girls. I've got a 22-year-old and a 19-year-old, and actually they are just brilliant for saying, Mum, that you wouldn't do it, you wouldn't have it any other way. So kind of stop moaning, stop being miserable. This has been fantastic for you in terms of your kind of overall sense of worth, I guess. So stick with it. Clearly there are ups and downs, and but I think I feel incredibly privileged for the route I've had. And just on the subject of mentors, Kevin, I would also say that some of the most important mentors I've had have been people from the younger generation. So people that we would consider to be our juniors. I've got some junior colleagues who I regularly, go out to coffee with, and an hour with one of those those colleagues, you just come away with just fantastic perspectives and a real sort of sense of camaraderie and support, but critical friendship as well. So I think one can find mentors in all sorts of interesting places.
That's a very interesting perspective, and I have to say I've never heard that before. So that's really refreshing. Camilla, we probably should draw us to a close shortly. Are there things you feel that you haven't had an opportunity to say, or I haven't given you an opportunity to say? Just sort of thinking generally about leadership. Is there anything else you'd like to add about how you see it? Any principles, issues, just whatever?
I think something that's kind of grown on me quite a lot in the last couple of years. At the Royal College, we are doing a lot of work around equality, diversity, and inclusion. And I lead that work. And the reason I lead it is that I think inclusion is such a fundamental issue, particularly within medicine, certainly in the UK, that it needs senior leadership to get involved. So I think leadership can take you into some quite uncomfortable places. But I think being accountable and being transparent, I think for me are fundamental aspects to good leadership. And so the reason I mention the inclusion work is that, we've had some very difficult pushback from members, criticisms. Social media has been very cruel on some occasions. But I'm absolutely resolute that on topic areas like inclusion, but climate change is another area where I'm taking a senior leadership role as well, because I think it's another kind of fundamental issue that we're having to deal with. I think as a leader, you have to just sometimes be prepared to just throw yourself in and accept that not everyone's going to be happy and that you're going to take criticism. But actually, if you stick to the fact that I'm happy to be accountable, I want to hear feedback, both positive and negative, as long as it's given, politely and in a I would say kind way, then I'll listen to it. But I think leadership can take there's definitely some bumpy aspects to a leadership journey, particularly if you throw yourself into some of these kind of more difficult areas. So I think for the people who are doing the course, it's about also being aware that if you really want to get stuck into contentious areas, is surround yourselves with some good solid support. Brace yourself for some bumpy areas along the journey, but accountability and transparency, I think if you can stick to those sort of principles, you won't go far wrong. Camilla, thank you. This has been an extraordinary session, and I'm very grateful to you for it's my pleasure. This is really very helpful, and I can see why the Royal College has got you as their president. You're very kind. Well, no, Camilla, thank you. It's been wonderful. So thank you so much for your contribution, and I look forward to actually engaging you a bit more as time goes on in this process. Yes, so and maybe we'll actually get to meet in person one day when the world opens up again, and that would be fabulous. Thank you, Camilla. Thanks very much. It's a great pleasure. All right. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye. Bye.